Maheen, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful because I've been researching and looking into your story so much over the past week or two. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me here, and thanks for even just doing the background homework.
So I figured we'd start with you as a public speaker at ages 8 or 9. Most 8 or 9 year olds are playing with crayons, but you were speaking in front of crowds. Talk to me about that experience and how that has shaped you so far.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Pakistan, and my mom, she's this phenomenal um, leader, I would say. She's a psychologist and was a professor. And so she kind of knew the power of public speaking and how much confidence it instills in a person. And I was someone who I had a lot of passion as a kid. Like I would see wars happening in the world and horrible things happening in the world and be so upset that I wanted to do something about it. And so the most powerful tool I had at that time, at that age, was my voice as a young person. And so, because I had supportive parents, they put me in forums where I could train with people and I could go into events where I could share what was on my mind. And so, I remember at the age of 8 doing a speech on why the war on Iraq is so terrible. And I remember writing letters to President Bush at that time and hearing back from his assistant, which I don't know if it was an automated email, and like conversations like why sons are not the only treasure and like why daughters, should also be considered equal in some ways. Like a lot of like random topics that you wouldn't hear an 8-year-old talk about. But I am very grateful for that experience in life because it every day helps me to date.
Mm. Well, I want to get into the growing up in Pakistan and then moving to Canada and how that shaped your reality. Is it the same? Is it different? Talk to me about like how would you describe it to someone living in Pakistan, to someone who's never set foot in Pakistan?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of misconceptions people have about Pakistan. I had an incredible life there and actually never wanted to leave. And we left because my brother was in Canada and he was starting to feel, he was missing family and he was building a career here. And my mom wanted to sort of support him and move here. So I was really against it. Um, and I remember when I first moved to Canada, hearing people say things to me where I was like, man, like you have it all wrong about Pakistan. I remember my first day in high school, this girl sitting in front of me turned around and she was like, how did you survive in Pakistan? Like, how didn't you not die in a bomb blast or something? And I was like, it's just literally like Toronto, but with a lot more traffic and no rules about the traffic. That's kind of how I see it. There's just like a lot of chaos. I think people have a perspective about India, and when they think about Pakistan, they just think it's miles apart. But if you really think about it, India and Pakistan were one country just 70 years ago. It's literally the same country, just divided by a border just 70 years ago. And so it's a very modern country in many ways, but obviously there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of differences in economic hierarchies. And that's what makes it really difficult there, because if you have money, you have a good life. And if you don't have money, you don't have a good life. So that's the one thing about North America. When you move here, you learn the privileges that you can get here, even if you're not earning lavishly, because you can't have the same thing back in Pakistan. But the people there are very educated, very talented. Um, I think the opportunities are not as common as they're here, but I wholeheartedly believe that if my friends back home got the same opportunities as me here, they would be way more successful than I am today.
And you've done work to help give some of those opportunities to people who might not have them. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I have. So I go back every year. My goal in life is to like be connected with Pakistan without the help of my parents. So I have like a consistent link to the country. It's given me so much. It's made me who I am today, and I need to be that connective tissue. I need to continue that. So I go back every year. I mentor a lot of students there. I advise with some companies there. And through Facebook, I'm a product designer at Facebook. I have been trying to find ways and opportunities to sort of share the resources in that country. So, for example, 2 years ago, I started an innovation lab in Pakistan on behalf of Facebook. So, essentially, providing access to Oculus headsets in Pakistan so students and developers can build the ecosystem. And like one fun fact I learned through that entire experience is like some of the top used Oculus games are actually made in Pakistan, and nobody knows that. Even I didn't know that, and I work at Oculus. And so, the more you know, you're like, wow, like people here are so talented. Without the resources, they're like building like the most funded game in the VR headsets.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the study or the what happened with the kids who were given iPads and all of a sudden they can learn better at a fifth grade education level. And I was just like, whoa, that's crazy. And is that kind of in the same line?
Yeah, I can tell you about that. So that's like a
Please.
separate side of my life. I'm so surprised you found that. So before I even graduated university, one of my goals in life was to like figure out how I can use my talents to like um, better improve parts of the world that I'm related to, like Pakistan. And one of the things that's always important in improving anything in an ecosystem is education, right? You need to educate people so everyone can understand better how to navigate these situations. And so I started an NGO with a friend, and it was called Let's Learn, Empower, Transform, Solve. And the whole goal there was to empower people with education, but in ways where we're not disrupting the system, we're just improving access to education. And one way to do that is to invest in technology and to invest in the curriculum, both which aren't very accessible to people. And so we heard this TED talk from a guy who in India, he essentially installed a brick wall and installed some iPads in this brick wall, and he left those iPads in there so no one could steal the iPads, but essentially you could Google whatever you want on the iPad. And what he found was that after a few months of returning, the students in the kids in the village who have no access to education had reached the level of like a grade 4 or 5 just by Googling things that they were like curious about. And so what that teaches you is that self-motivated learning is a lot more powerful than like forcing a kid to go to school when their parents might not send them because they need to be earning money and doing jobs. And so that was really fascinating for us. And so we started developing pieces of technology that could enable us to do that. We started building little Wi-Fi systems with Raspberry Pis, started finding ways to get extremely cheap iPads and send them to schools in Africa and in Pakistan, so that basically we could distribute curriculum through these Wi-Fi systems that we were building, as well as give people iPads to be able to like read and learn on the go. And that was a really interesting time in my life because I was doing it as a student, still trying to make it in my career. And it was very taxing, but it was very rewarding at the same time.
So how does that like what's the practical things that you do? You build Wi-Fi pods. What exactly does that do? Like break that down, the process of helping give Wi-Fi and services to more people.
Yeah, essentially. So you want to be able to improve communication between these iPads and send easily curriculums and new books and those kinds of experiences on these iPads. And for that, a lot of these villages aren't set up with the right systems to even be able to communicate, right? If we're like installing these things so far away. And so you need a way to connect these iPads together and to be able to send stuff. So that's why we were building these like Wi-Fi, Raspberry Pi systems and installing them in the 2 or 3 places we started in. And the iPads, there's just like as technology is getting better, they're becoming cheaper and they're being developed in certain countries for these purposes. So it's really just about like piecing this entire system together and figuring out what you can do. On the back end, we were also trying to like figure out how can we improve the curriculum. Like we don't want to just like send books that like are full of biases and actually are not improving life skills that kids might need to make it, right? And so we also worked a lot with research labs in UBC and in other universities in Canada to help develop some of those curriculums. But this was a long time ago, like 7, 8 years ago that I did this work.
How do people from Pakistan view you as someone who grew up there and now is working at Facebook? What is the reception you get?
Um, I think it's a little tricky. I get often it's like the oh, we're so inspired by you and like we want to like follow in your footsteps. But then I'm also very careful about the image because I think there are certain people who look at me. I'll go and give talks, and there will be certain people who'll say, "Oh, but you had such a privileged life, right? You had a mom who was supportive and supported your career, and that's why. And like you had the opportunity to go to North America, and so for you to come here and tell us XYZ is the career and XYZ is the thing you should do, it's not almost fair because it's not accessible to them. And so I have to be very careful about it because that's not my intention. My intention is not, hey, here's a playbook of how you can make it and this is how you can be successful. It's about how can you change your mindset and how can you stand up for yourself and how can you think a little bit outside of the box to find your passions and know that yes, I come from a privileged background, but it wasn't like this for I come still from a family where a lot of my relatives still live in villages, and you know a lot of my cousins are very similar to you. A lot of my siblings are similar to you. A lot of my family relatives are similar to you, and so I might look a certain way right now, and I think that's the one thing in life that I really don't like about how it's evolved over time. The more opportunities you get, the more privileges you get, the more that starts to reflect your brand. But you should never forget where you came from and what makes you up and who you were before. And I was having a conversation, this is kind of a tangent, but I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday about how, you know, like right now I'm living in Williamsburg, and Williamsburg is kind of a gentrified area and it's like very, you know, nice. And I love it. I'm having a great time. And I've never really experienced these luxuries before, but I don't want to get used to it because I want to be able to like still go back to the village that my parents grew up in and be able to sleep there without having to complain, but rather just like adjusting to it because life is like that. I have these luxuries today and like I might not have these luxuries like in a week or in a year. And so flexibility and the ability to adapt to any situation is incredibly important to me. So I don't like it when people attach that perspective to me because I don't want to come off that way. And it's just a good reminder for me to continue working upon that.
Yeah, and I wonder if you got that perspective from your grandfather who was born in poverty, made it as a lawyer, and then through unfortunate circumstances didn't have the wealth or at the end of his life. And so if that story is correct, you know, how has that impacted you?
Yeah, that story is absolutely correct. And I think that is where I get all my ambition from, right? My grandfather, he came from like that really like essentially his parents didn't know the value of education and he really wanted to get educated, and so he would work at the rail yard train stations and would actually like study under the lamppost because he didn't have electricity at home, and he would study during his night shifts to become a lawyer, and he became a lawyer, and he essentially like taught his kids the value of education, and he had a really strict hold over my mom and her siblings to take education really seriously. And so my mom had a really privileged life in her younger years, and then it all went away because my grandfather made some bad decisions and didn't, maybe he got too caught up in that lifestyle. I don't know what it was, but essentially lost a lot of the money. And you know, my mom, she didn't have, her mom had passed away and she was like dealing with stepmom issues and poverty and all of these situations. And she never felt those poverty effects that deeply because she still had a loving family, but it was definitely a very clear life change of going from like living lavishly to now all of a sudden having to like fend for yourself. And so growing up, she never, even if she had money, she never made us feel like we were living extremely lavishly. She would make sure that we lived comfortably, but we knew where we came from and our roots. And this is where religion also comes into play. I'm Muslim, and so I in Islam, like, you're taught often that everything that is in the world is material wealth, and you came without nothing and you'll leave without nothing. And what you'll leave with is essentially like the deeds that you've done in the world, and the type of person that you were, and the goods that you've done in the world, not the land that you own, the clothes that you own, the car that you own. And so, because I was just literally taught this every day of my life growing up, it's ingrained in my brain. And so, you know, I am I might look on the outside as someone who has material wealth and gain and all that, but it actually brings me a lot of agony if I'm like buying branded products. Like, you'll rarely see me. I've never in my life touched like a Gucci purse or Prada or any of that, because it's just not what I've been taught or who I am, and it just reflects very differently from the way I like to lead my life.
Why does it bring you agony?
I think it brings me agony because this whole idea of consumerism is very opposite to what I've been taught growing up. Um, I remember there's this really funny story. I moved to Canada, and in moved to Vancouver for for college, and um, I remember in Vancouver, Canada, because Lululemon is from there. Everybody bought Lululemons. Every girl owned Lululemons, and so I was like, man, like, what is this with this Lululemons? Like, I gotta buy myself a pair. And I remember going to the store, and it was like $100 or something, which was like a big amount for me at that time. And I bought a pair of Lululemons, but I stood there and thought about it for at least an hour. Like, I was just like, I would put it back and pick it up, put it back and pick it up. And then I bought it, and then I returned it, and I bought it again. And then I remember like crying that day, because it was the first piece of branded item I had bought in my life. And I had succumbed to the pressure of society to essentially buy something that was like the hot item because everyone was wearing it, because it makes you look good, but it really doesn't make you look that much better than like regular yoga pants. And so that was like a good lesson to me of like, okay, this is definitely not meeting an inner value. And that's when I really realized like my inner value is very anti-consumerism, and like not really care about the brand, but care about the quality. And so now I might own branded items, but it's not for the brand name. It's truly because I think it looks nice, or because the quality is really good, or it's serving a purpose that I need for something in life.
What would you tell to someone who is living their life based on external means?
Um, I think everyone has their own values in life, right, that they're leading with. And so I'm not here to judge or say that's wrong. But I think what I will say is like, just never get too caught up in that. Never get too caught up in your material wealth that it actually gets in the way of your happiness, because it is a reality. You could have something today and it will go away tomorrow. And we're fools for thinking that, you know, all of this will stay around forever. And I've seen people who think the way I think, but then they'll go on the extreme selfish mode way where they'll just like never spend money, because that's also not the point. You should be you shouldn't be on either extreme. It's all about balance. Life is about balance, right? And so I think just staying grounded really is important. So you could be buying, I have friends who buy a lot of like brand names, and like to invest in really expensive things like that, and they're really great people. It's not that they're bad people, it's just that they um that is something that they get joy from, those items. And that's okay, as long as you're aware that if one day these things were to go away, you can adjust to the new reality that you'll have.
Mm. Is there any way we could practice that? Practice doing that on a day-to-day basis?
um well, I was listening to one of your earlier guests today, and he was talking about how he was in India and a lot of his stuff got stolen. And I've seen that happen with a lot of my friends where, you know, we'll like be in Italy, and like all my friends' stuff got stolen. And I remember in that situation, in that trip, we had two different friends who got their stuff stolen. One friend got her like passport and everything she came with to Italy stolen, and another friend lost her phone. And the reaction of these two people was completely different. The person who had her passport and all her belongings stolen did not weep at all. She was sad, of course, but she was strong. And her strength made us drew us even more to her because we wanted to support her. We knew she was suffering, but we knew that she needed us because we could tell. But she didn't make our trip any worse. She didn't reflect that on us, and she was a great sport about it. And to date, I have immense respect for how she dealt with that situation, because losing that stuff meant a big deal to her because she doesn't come from a very well-off background. The other girl who lost her phone bawled on the train and cried so much. And of course you're sad, and I understand that. But I think, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when we compare the two situations, it just makes you realize like how you deal with situations is so different because the way you're thinking about it is so different. And so I think with life, you just learn how to deal with these situations differently. And so I would say on a day-to-day basis, it's important to just put things in the grand scheme of things. That's how you can practice it. If someone asks you for money, put it in the grand scheme of things. If someone loses something, put it in the grand scheme of things. Understand how big is this really? Are you making this situation a lot worse than it actually is? Or is it truly that bad that you need to be doing things a certain way?
I love that. And I want to go back to you going to Pakistan and talk about, you said you want to transform people's mindsets. And that's really what you're trying to do. And I'm curious where people's mindsets are in your head versus where you want to take them.
There's a lot of things where I think my mindset is like a little off in a lot of communities. And this is why I started my podcast, Fake ID. I think, and it's kind of like the work you're doing, right? You're sharing people's stories so people can learn about different perspectives. And if there's one thing that's really important to me in life, it's sharing people's stories as well, because we all bring such unique perspectives, but we need to be open to listening and shifting our mindsets to understand these perspectives. Growing up in Pakistan, I saw a lot of people that were very like close-minded, but then in Canada and America, I also meet a lot of people who are very close-minded. And so I'm like, okay, like it doesn't matter where you are in the world, like people think very close-mindedly, but then there's also people who think very open-mindedly. And it's really important for me to like share these stories in a way where we can all listen to each other. And it's not that people want to be close-minded or they take pride in that. It's just that they don't have access to that information and those stories. And so a couple of things that I've been focused on in terms of sharing stories around is identity, thinking about like how you've evolved over time and how you don't have to fit into a box that someone has created for you. I'm Muslim and Pakistani, but I'm also Canadian, and I also love Japan, and all of these things make up who I am. And if you think that I should be a certain way as a Pakistani or a certain way as a Muslim or a certain way as a Canadian, where is your definition coming from? Because there is no definition. And who is making up these definitions? Because no one fits in these boxes at all. So that's kind of some of the stories that I'm really excited about changing mindsets on. And I'm also, I've worked a lot on like changing people's mindsets about other countries like Pakistan and even Japan, and like the places that I'm very globally minded, and these places mean a lot to me. And if I have the ability to tell stories, then I want to highlight those stories.
What drew you to Japan?
That's a question I get a lot. And I don't have a very great answer, but I'll put it this way. I think so, you meet a lot of people in life who love traveling the world, and they like traveling a lot of different cultures and countries. And I think that's fantastic because it opens up your mind in many different ways. For me, I think going into depths is really important. And so if I want to experience something, like I want to go deep to really understand it. And with Japan, ever since I was in Pakistan, like I would watch anime and whatnot, and that's kind of where it started. And then I visited like 10 years ago and just really loved the culture. I think I'm an artist and designer, and design and art is is very meaningfully done there with a lot of intentionality, simplicity, and like this idea of no consumerism is also very strong in a lot of parts of Japanese design. So there's often like white minimal, no brand, which really elevates the quality rather than taking away from the actual experience with some names. So those kinds of things really appeal to just who I was as a person. But then over time, what happened was that because I kept going back and I would go back every year and I started learning the language, I realized that I could explore the depths of Japan in ways I couldn't go to any other country other than Pakistan because I understood the history, the culture as a tourist, not as a local. Um, and I knew how to like speak to the people there. So I started going to like really rural areas that no tourists would go to, like, or no even like local Japanese people would go to. Some of my coworkers would be like, what the heck? Like, I've never heard of this city. Why are you going there? And they're Japanese, right? Um, and that to me was beautiful because I met and developed such great bonds with people there, because they were also fascinated. Like, why is this random girl from like Pakistan and America like so invested in this tiny city? But to me, because I came with fresh eyes, it was beautiful wherever I was going. So to date, I've been to like 40-ish cities in Japan. Yeah, and I hope to explore more.
What's it like to be one part Pakistani, one part Canadian, one part Japanese in a sense because of all the exploration you've been doing? So like you're clearly everything, but you might not be accepted by some of those groups. You mentioned before in Canada, the girl said, you were shocked that you telling you about the story there. And I'm sure people in Pakistan are like, this woman is not really Pakistani because she moved to
Yeah,
Canada. So what's it like from your perspective to be living with all these different identities?
I think it means I'm often misunderstood a lot. Um, and I think there was a time in my life where I blew that up more. I used to be very patriotic about Pakistan, and it's an important part of who I am. And what started happening was everyone started introducing me as like, this is Maheen Sohail and she loves Japan. And it's like, okay, I love Japan. Yes, it's true. But I don't want it to come off as, oh, she doesn't like Pakistan and she likes Japan. Because that's not what it is. I love all these different cultures. And so I started leaning more heavily into the Pakistani side just to like feel, because I felt like I had a responsibility as someone who was like working in like big tech and all this. And I felt like I needed to elevate my country rather than like disassociate from it because I don't like it when people do that. But that also kind of felt fake because I was suppressing certain parts of me and elevating other parts of me. So that's really like what came to my mind is like, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to express myself this way? I would honestly like my parents are very supportive, but they would also say things like, why don't you have more Pakistani friends? Why can't you be more like other Pakistani girls? And there's a lot of cultural issues that I constantly face on a day to day basis because I don't live life like whatever a typical Pakistani girl is supposed to live life as, whatever that is. Um, and I just absolutely hate that. I hate all the expectations that come because I don't understand where these come from. They're like rooted with intergenerational biases and traumas and all of these things when really like each person is so beautiful in their unique ways because of the decisions they make in life, the people that they're surrounded by, the experiences that they've led, right? Why should I be like other Pakistani girls when not that there's anything wrong with that, but also just even that phrase is so wrong. Like every person is great in their own way. Like, why are you comparing me to another person? So I have a lot of like anger around this topic, which is why I have this podcast. And I actually believe like a lot of people feel this way. Everyone feels misunderstood, right? Because there are parts of them that everyone goes into a different circle and reflects a different side of them. And I just wish that we could all reflect who we are all the time so we can be our most authentic self at work, our most authentic self at home, our most authentic self with our friends. And it's not that people have to like truly understand it all. They just need to be open to it. That's it. If you don't understand a certain part of my life, you don't have to comment on it, but you don't have to be against it either. And you don't have to walk away from me just because I don't match you 100%. Because then what's the beauty in the world if everyone's 100% the same?
Yeah, I think what we've done over the past 50 years since there's been airplane travel and globalized the world is we've created more and more of you, more and more people like you, because people are different. People are moving from place to place. 100 years ago, it wasn't possible for most people to go from Pakistan to Canada and from America to wherever. It's like we're living in a globalized world and we're all sitting here and saying, oh, wow, people are different. People are beautiful in their own way. And the 1950s America of everyone's the same, everyone watches the same programming is effectively over. And so it's a fascinating idea.
It's fascinating in some ways. When I start thinking about this, I'm like, there's also some like dark conversations around this, around colonialism. Like, I feel like in Pakistan, it's very westernized, which is why people misunderstand. Like, they don't understand Pakistan that well. But if you went there, sometimes I'm like, wow, you're more westernized than people in the West are.
Wow. In
I,
what way?
in the way that, like, I mean, my English was always good because I grew up watching all the English television in Pakistan. I was taught school in English. My Urdu is worse than my English, even though I grew up in Pakistan, because of the British system that was set in place in Pakistan when they took over Pakistan and India. And so, in a lot of ways, people there are like really fascinated by the Western culture and really want to adopt it. And so, our culture is actually diminishing because of the influence of the West. And as someone who has lived there and now here, I actually find that super sad because the culture is so beautiful. That's the beautiful part of the country. And I wish we would elevate that more rather than trying to become some other country. And I think this is true for a lot of Asian countries. The influence is just so strong. Some Asian countries have really held on to their strong identity, like Japan, and some have not. And that's where I think this gets a little dark.
Yeah, well, I think also we're going to change. We're all inherently going to change because of a globalized world. And some of the cultures and things we do today that we love are not going to be there in 20, 30 years because of technology and just a changing system. And recognizing that and understanding the fleeting nature of culture, of the things that we do on a day to day basis gives me a sense of ease and peace in the whole thing. But we talk about the future. We talk about, where the world is going. In researching you, I've been so fascinated because you have so many thoughts on what the future is going to look like. So what do you think? Where are we going in 5 years? What's the latest research saying in 5 years and 10 years away?
This is literally my job. Envisioning what the 5 to 10 year future is going to look like. Um, so I work in artificial intelligence and augmented reality, and I worked in VR before. And the reason I work in this field is because, first of all, these technologies are already here. They sound like they're really far away, but they're here. Like, just give it a few more years and we'll start democratizing. AI is already all around us. And so it's really important for designers, especially like diverse opinions, to be building this future to ensure that it is a future built with this global mindset rather than maybe previous technologies where it was built by specific communities only, benefiting specific communities, not built with the global mindset in mind. So that's why I do the work I do. And where I think the world is headed in 5 to 10 years is we are going to get a lot more efficient in a lot of the things, and we're going to gain a lot of superpowers. I think a lot of superpowers to like express ourselves and be who we want to be and be able to communicate that. For example, creators, you can see already, like with the rise of TikTok, right? You can see how video editing has transformed massively from people who spent hours on their computers and Premiere Pro to now with just a click of a few buttons on your mobile and you have like a great edited video that is full of incredible effects. And now everyone is a creator. everyone is creator. You just need good ideas. And I think that's going to happen on like even more levels across a lot of different types of platforms. So I think creator economy is going to get amazing. The ability to express yourself and like be who you are is going to get amazing. This idea of virtual reality where you can be anything you want, be transported to a different world and live a different reality, the ability to really immerse yourself, that I think is going to improve a lot. This idea of a metaverse is going to increase a lot. The idea that we're going to be building worlds in VR and being able to like do commerce in VR, where you're like selling your shirts in VR as like 3D assets and people are wearing them as avatars. And that's like a whole nother level of creator economy that we haven't seen. And then there's like our day-to-day jobs that are going to become better. I think VR is going to help the education industry a lot. The thought, like, this is the future that I'm excited for, the thought that like someone sitting in Pakistan can like attend a class in Harvard without having to even pay, or without having to like, maybe they will create some bar to like get in, but to everyone equally. And so I think the future is incredibly exciting. And I've just like mentioned a few of the use cases, but there's just so much more there of what will happen in 5 to 10 years, I think.
Oh my God. So we're already there in some respect, right? Because we're like, what I was curious about was Pokemon Go, right? You brought that up as in 50 years, it took 50 years for the plane to reach 50 million people, something like that, and
Yeah.
18 days for 50 million people to go to Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
And so you said that, I was like, whoa, that's mind blowing. And I'm curious why we haven't seen something like Pokemon Go since Pokemon Go started. What do you think?
I think what Pokemon Go did is it was an incredibly fascinating example to showcase how rapidly technology is growing.
Hmm.
And what that did was it kickstarted all these big tech companies to really take this space very seriously. Because we've seen like all you need is like one use case to take off. And we saw Pokemon Go take off. And since then, we've had like many developers create Pokemon Go like experiences. And Facebook's investing in Spark AR, which is like helping everyone create like AR effects for the world. Snapchat is heavily investing in face filters, and they have really great face filter technology and environment filter technologies. And so you see them all investing in these spaces, but this is not going to fully reach its potential until AR glasses come out. And a lot of different companies are on that race of AR glasses. And that is something that will take time, right? Like the way I like to describe it is VR is like a stepping stone to AR, because essentially everyone is going to learn lessons from VR. And then when AR does come around, which will take a bunch of years, we'll already be ready in our learnings from VR and be apply that to AR. But we're far from that a bit right now. And I think Pokemon Go was interesting, but it was a very niche use case that was mobile and AR. And there's not much you can do with like a mobile screen. It's very limited. It's when you can expand your horizons of your field of view, and what you can do with that is going to really, I think, push this forward.
So on Neuralink, are you going to get a chip in your head?
I hope not. I'm not supportive of that. I think one of the issues I have with technologies is I think there are people out there who treat technologies as something that will take over your life. They don't say it that way. They'll say it in a way where it's like, you will live, eat, and breathe with this technology, and like you can just play games for hours and like, whatever, the attention economy and all that companies make money off of. But for me, that's really not why I'm in this space. I think technologies have the potential to massively improve human lives, and they should only be used for that. It should not be a VR application should not be made to spend more time in VR and not take off the headset, because the world is a beautiful place. You should go out and play games, and you should go out for a run. But put on the headset when you want to like learn something hands-on, right? That's what VR is really good at. The ability that you can learn something by physically doing things that you would need to buy like a lot of equipment for and you won't have access to. Like doctors training how to do surgery in VR is like a great way to start learning. And so for me, that's like a really important way to evaluate what is useful technology and what is not useful technology. Is it making the world a better place, or is it just putting us in these loops that are degrading the human quality of life?
Isn't it inevitable that people are going to take it to try to create loops to make money? Because with Facebook, it was like, how can we make the most addictive product? And it serves so many people and helps so many people. But ultimately, they wanted just to make it more addicting to get someone in that loop. So, how do we not do that for virtual reality?
Yeah, I think so. With Facebook, it never started with how do we make the most addicting app. It started with I want to connect my college friends and I want to like meet other people. That's how it started. And I think at the core of a lot of these experiences, it's that. And then somewhere along the line, like, things go astray. And then that's where people are like, wait, where is this going? Instagram too, it was like to express and share your life, right? And today it's like focused on the creator economy. And so I think what's with technology, there's always going to be good and bad, always. And this is where I think, this buzzword that's been going around the industry of like ethics in technology is like incredibly important, but we just need to elevate that conversation a lot more. We need to be able, and I think those conversations have helped a lot, right? Like screen time in Apple and a lot of other apps came as a result of people questioning this quality of life that it was creating. The conversation of how authentic are you really on social media is really influencing how the next generation thinks about filters and how authentic their life is represented. Like we're seeing a massive shift in maybe between my generation and the new coming generation and how they think about authenticity. They're actually way more authentic than maybe my generation is. And research shows this because they saw what it did to my generation of like being caught up with the likes, and they might still do that, but I think there is actually like a fundamental shift in people's mindset of I want to be more authentic. How can I be more authentic? How can I express myself more? How can I create content that expresses my individuality more? Versus maybe in my generation, it was a bit more about like blending in and like going on the trends and all of that. So I actually think the conversation of the negativity of technology does make massive shift, maybe not massive, but they do make changes and shifts in our environment and in the way we think. They're just a little slower. And I just wish they would happen on a more massive scale.
You mentioned ethics a couple of times, and I know ethics is near and dear to your heart. What are some of the key ethics that we should be thinking about for virtual reality?
I think with VR, there's a lot of obviously like ethical things you have to think about. Especially like early in the stages, you have to think a lot about safety because a lot of the real world's rules don't apply in VR, right? You could literally go up in VR to someone and like slap them, right? Slap them. Not, they won't feel it, but you could like harass them and there's no repercussions because no one knows who you are. That's scary. And I've had that happen where like a kid will just like run through my body and it's like bizarre, or like they'll like yell really weird things to me, or women get harassed a lot in VR. And the doxing community for gaming comes into VR and it's really scary. And so so the ethics there is like how can we learn from like how the real world has built not ethics, but rules in the day-to-day basis that have protected us. Like how can we build systems of rules that can have repercussions in VR for anyone who's like abusing other people? So you can learn from the real world and bring them into VR. I think the other thing is around identity. This is where my fascination from identity started because I worked in VR and I was working on identity systems. Is this idea that in VR you can be anything and anyone, but your authenticity goes away. And so how do you build these like rules and systems and repercussions if you are no one single person, because you could have like 7 identities, 7 avatars, 7 different names, right? And you're anonymous. And so I think that's really fascinating because as someone who was working on those technologies, I had to think a lot about how do we help you express who you are and stay anonymous. And there's a lot of value in that, right? Like people from the LGBTQ community that might not have come out in the real world can really express themselves in VR. And that's so beautiful. But how do you keep them safe? And how do you make sure they're not harassed? And so very, very complex problems that I've worked on that I've really enjoyed in the past.
When do you think this is going to be to the average person? Like, I've never used VR, but when do you think just the average person would start using something like this?
I would hope in 4 to 5 years, the average person will
Wow.
start using it, because I've already seen a massive shift in the last year and a half. I started working in VR maybe like 5 years ago. And back then, like, no one really owned headsets. It was way too expensive. There was not really much in it. And VR has gone a lot cheaper. It went from being like $1,000 system to just like 299 or 300. And and a lot of people who are gamers or even casual gamers are investing in VR headsets. And like my dad plays table tennis in VR every day, and he has an injured
Wow.
foot and he can't really walk. So he's been playing table tennis every day, and he's convinced his friends to buy VR headsets, which I am not behind this, like not because I work in this. He just really cares about it. And he's like making friends in VR and all that. He uses it more than I do. Um, and so, yeah, I think actually like within 4 years it will happen.
What did your dad buy specifically?
He bought the Oculus Quest, and the Quest 2, the one that just came out like last year. And it's this like small headset, portable, you can take it anywhere. And he bought like this table tennis game in it called, actually don't remember the name of the game, but he likes it a lot. He like gets a workout in, gets to play table tennis while his like cast on his foot is on. um and he loves it. Every day he like sends me his best tournament videos from the headset.
So cool. So I'm sure a lot of people are curious, what is it actually like to work at Facebook? I think that there's probably a lot of misconceptions out there. And I'm curious, what are some of the most common misconceptions and what is it actually like?
I think the common misconception is that people at Facebook have ill intentions, and they just want to like take all your money and spread misinformation, and that we can listen to every conversation and we know everything that's happening in everyone's phones. This is all a lie. I mean, I work inside, and I think my experience as someone who's been inside has been so different, because I see how deeply people care to change the world. And maybe one of the problems we have is that the company is so massive. We have changed the world in many ways. Like, think about how many times in the day you use WhatsApp, Messenger, and to connect with your loved ones on Facebook or Instagram, to like connect with people, to share what's happening in your life. All of this beauty that it has enabled. I think we're a lot more connected in the world today because of what social media has done. It does come with negative repercussions that were out of the control of how this company thought it would scale. And now it is the responsibility of these companies to fix those problems. And I think that's where the company is failing and working actively. But within the company, the people that are hired, everyone wants to make that change. We all understand how negative the repercussions are of like being on Instagram too long and scrolling all day, and maybe like the things that it does to the youth. And there are teams actively working on like how to prevent bullying on Instagram, how to improve our AI algorithms so we can better catch terrorism activities on Facebook, or um, we can better detect, anything that's like causing harm on these platforms. um, and yeah, I would just say like one thing that I've really enjoyed about Facebook is how talented people around me are and how much I learn from them on a constant basis. But I also think that that's just the reality of like what technology and Silicon Valley. There's a lot of smart people who want to do good, um, and I just hope we can be more intentional about it and actually like I think there's been a massive shift in technology where maybe 10 years, maybe 6, 7 years ago, technology was more about like enabling these new experiences like the ride share economy, the social media connecting with people economy, the Uber Eats and all that stuff. Now, I think it's about making sure that we are being responsible about these economies and how can we make sure that these are sticking around in a sustainable way rather than just like a make more money way.
Mm, yeah, I definitely noticed that as well. And you mentioned before about how people are so talented at Facebook, and I heard you talk in a different podcast about how you felt some sort of imposter syndrome from working on such an incredible team when you first started. What were some of the things you did to help combat that and get over that hump of feeling like an imposter to now feeling comfortable with your role or comfortable with where you are with VR?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's just like I am really grateful to the mentors I've had in my life, right? Again, I'm this girl from Pakistan who like honestly didn't really know what she was doing for majority of her life, just kind of like swimming and trying to like make it by like studying everything I could, being curious and open-minded and pushing myself into zones where I wasn't comfortable and learning and growing. And Facebook was like definitely the most uncomfortable place to start in because people were so talented, so talented. And at the same time, people were so incredibly nice and they elevated me. They didn't say, "Oh, like this girl doesn't know anything." They supported me and they helped me learn. And I had sponsors and mentors in my life who were patient with me, who gave me access to things that I could learn from. I think over time, what I learned is that, um, it's your hard work and your ability to understand what are strengths that you bring to the table that can make you even better in what you do, right? For example, I think you have a really great art of like talking to people about things that are on a deeper level and getting like some of those like things that people don't usually talk about, right? You have that strength, and you're utilizing that to run this podcast and to get stories out that maybe other people won't be able to do. So for me, the thing that helped me gain that confidence was, what is that thing for me? For me, it was my past experiences that make up who I am, my identity thing, right? It's the fact that I understand cultures in a very different way from many people because I've lived in Pakistan. I understand Japan. I understand some other cultures. I speak different languages. I know different types of people. I was a filmmaker before I became a designer. So I understand how people tell stories and how people use cameras to tell stories. So I brought that to my workspace. I'd never have worked in VR. I'd never touched a headset and I was working in VR. I didn't know how to make games. However, I knew how to make videos. And so I communicated my ideas through video filmmaking and got my point across. Um, I grew up doing public speaking. So I know how to communicate my idea and how to speak up in meetings. And so I leverage that to like talk to the right people and get my ideas out on the table. So the minute you realize what your strengths are, that's where I think your imposter syndrome can get a bit better because you're like, hey, I'm really talented in these ways. And yes, I can't do these other things that, require you to be a designer, but it's okay because I have these other things that other people can't do.
You mentioned the mentors aspect of it and the people helping guide you. What would you say to someone who doesn't have a mentor in their life or someone pulling themselves up? What direction would you recommend them go?
I think the first thing is that like this is a thing that I heard growing up, which was people want to give back. Plus, like, especially a lot of people want to share their expertise. It's their expertise. They want to talk about it. They want to share with other people. People like me who have gotten mentorship from other people, we want to pull other people with us as well. We don't want to just be on this journey alone because I know I didn't get here alone. I got here with the help of other people. So how can I help other people get to where I am? And so, first of all, like, don't be afraid to reach out to someone that you want as a mentor, or even just if you want their time. It reminds me of like, I think I read one of your tweets where like you wanted to like get your like, star guests and you just made a tweet and you were able to get those people. If you don't ask, you'll never know. Right. So that's like the first lesson. The second is, even if these people don't respond, and I've had it where like maybe sometimes I'm so stretched thin that I can't actually respond to every person, then I think another way to look at it is like, take a step back and like think about how in life you have had those sponsors. You've definitely had a sponsor or two. Everyone has had a sponsor or two. It could have been a teacher in your school. It could have been a friend who was there to like help you through a project. It could have been your sibling. It could have been your parent. There has to be someone who has had faith in you. It could even be religion, right? Like there's all these like, it could be a book that you read. It could be a book that you read that changed your life. And so I would think about sponsors in an even different way and think about like where else do you get your support from in life, to keep you going and to give you strength.
Love that. So you mentioned how storytelling was one of your key strengths before. What are some of the most important aspects of telling a good story?
I think the number one is the message. What is the message that you're trying to get across? And ensuring that your entire narrative is around that. There has to be an arc to storytelling, right? We've all learned this. There's like a climax and like an ending. And the one thing, you know, you learn when you're doing public speaking is it should never be too many things. People only remember three things. And so you have to repeat those three things beginning and at the end. And you have to, you know, that's the whole hierarchy of like attention span of like how do you create that narrative, and how do you ensure that those three things are repeated enough or are clear enough that the message is so simple. If someone listens to a story, there should be a one liner they remember. What is that one liner? So that's like the number one thing, the message. I think the other thing is where I like to experiment more is aspects of storytelling that are more environmental. So, for example, I'm really fascinated by sound design. As a filmmaker, I know how much music and sound effects can take a role in helping you feel immersed in the situation. So, in Fake ID, I use a lot of sound effects to, when someone tells a story, you know, if someone's telling me a story about the partition of India and Pakistan, like I'll play the war sounds that were happening and the national anthem and whatever they're mentioning at that time. And I think those sounds have a way to transport you from this reality to that reality without having ever been there. So I think sound design is really important. Um, and I'm sure there's a lot more, but those are the two that I care more deeply about.
Yeah, I noticed that in your podcast, just like how you'd have background music here and there. I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. This is a whole production. I feel like I'm at a show or something.
Hmm.
So that's really cool. Well, you mentioned the one liner. So I'm curious, what is the one liner from your story that you've lived thus far?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I would say, okay, so first I would just say one liners change in different parts of your life. My current one liner at the moment is experimentation leads to growth and clarity. And I say that because I am in the midst of figuring out what's next for me in my career. I'm in the midst of running my podcast and understanding what this means to me. I've ran other side projects in the past 2 years that I've like started and like stopped. And I'm moving to a new city, New York. And I really believe experimentation leads to growth, and it will bring more clarity to what is it that I truly find passion in, that I want to share as my truth with the world.
That is such a beautiful way to wrap this up. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom, wise beyond your years. Where can people connect with you further?
You can go to my website, maheensohail.com, and all my social media channels should be there. Find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Mahi Macha, Twitter, Maheen Sohail, any of them. Please reach out. I'd love to chat and connect.
Awesome. And those will all be below. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was really, really fun.